Have you ever felt that gentle nudge telling you there's something more? That the path you carefully planned might not be the one that you're meant to take? I'm Marisa Switzer, and this is If I Hadn't Said Yes, Stories of Surrender and the Pursuit of Purpose. Each week, I sit down with women who have trusted their journey, stepped into the unknown, and discovered their true calling along the way. Whether you're feeling called to make a change or simply seeking inspiration from others who have taken the leap, this is your invitation to explore what might be possible if you say yes. Hi guys, and welcome to our first episode of our Motherhood series. If you're watching this on YouTube, you might notice my background is a little bit different. I'm actually in a hotel right now in Charlotte, North Carolina, which is where my motherhood journey took place, and I wasn't sure if I was going to record here or wait till I got home. You'll hear on episode 3 of this month, which covers like my birth, that there was a lot of trauma that happened here before we left, and is part of the reason why we left. And so I wasn't sure how I was going to feel while I was here, if I was going to feel up to recording. And to be honest, it's been a rough few days, but there's always good, there's always bad. And I've noticed that when I am able to talk about it and talk through it, I feel better. And so I thought I should sit down and at least start the motherhood series. Today we're just going to be talking about how I decided that I wanted to be a mom, because if you know me at all, you know that growing up, I actually didn't want kids. And so I love to share that story of deciding that I wanted to pursue motherhood and what that looked like. And so today's going to be a more positive episode. I did just want to kind of give that background as far as recording, where I'm recording, why I'm recording here. So let's get into it. So I do just want to express why it was so important for me to do this motherhood series this month of May. One of the big reasons that I felt called to start this podcast is because I have felt called to share my testimony of both the trials and triumphs that I've had over the last 5 years, and most of them are surrounding motherhood. And that obviously wasn't intentional. I didn't know that motherhood would, not only transform me so much, but that the journey to motherhood and the journey surrounding motherhood would really shape who I am as a person today, and would give me these stories of truly just wrestling with God and wrestling with my faith and wrestling with His goodness in the midst of really hard times. And I still haven't figured out every little lesson that I was supposed to learn from everything that happened, but I still feel like I am meant to share how I've navigated these situations, because I know that there's a lot of other moms and a lot of other women who have to navigate these situations, who might be in the same place I was, where I'm like, God, where are you? God, why is this happening? How can you let this happen? And just everything that I've learned from that. And so it was really important for me to do this motherhood series. And I hope that whether you're a parent or you're not a parent, that you'll take something away from it. I hope specifically with today's episode that if you have been debating whether or not you want to be a parent, that again, you can take something away from it. I think that everyone is completely entitled to their own decision as far as pursuing becoming parents or not. There are definitely people in the world who are totally valid in not wanting to become parents. This is my story and mine alone. And again, I hope that you can take something away from it. Let's get into motherhood. I do have some notes today just because I wanted to make sure that I hit every point that I have been really feeling called to share. So growing up, I did not want kids. I had this vision for my life from a very young age. If you've listened to episode 1 and the story behind this podcast, you know that from the age of about 12, I just saw myself as this like career oriented woman working in New York City, climbing the corporate ladder, really making a name for myself in the fashion industry. And the lifestyle that I saw myself living was more of probably being single till about 40 years old and focusing all of my life on my career and being the fun aunt and maybe having a dog, but not pursuing motherhood. And that was the vision for my life. That was my plan. That was what I was pursuing and really making happen, honestly. But as you may know, God wrecked all of my plans in 2016 when I decided to leave New York and pursue the plans that He had for my life over the plans that I had for my life. And so obviously that really put anything on the table and opened a lot of doors. But growing up, I just did not feel very maternal, like around babies and toddlers. And, I had a friend whose mom had like an in-home daycare, and I was the person who's like, what do I do with this thing? Like I just did not feel like I had that maternal bone in my body, which is very ironic because when you ask any of my friends, I have always been the mom of the group. I've always been like the designated driver. I'm always the one planning, making sure everyone's okay. Like that is just who I've always been. I have always, had this ability to be able to see and take care of everyone. And even though I didn't see that as maternal when it came to children, I think that was always there, and I just did not recognize it. Growing up, when I would tell people that I didn't want kids, a lot of the time I would get like, oh, you'll change your mind. And I just want to acknowledge that while I changed my mind, I know that's not everyone's story. And I think it's important for us to have respect for women who either choose not to become a mother or choose not to have children, or for women who can or are struggling to. It's really hard, and we'll talk about this in the next episode. But even women who struggle with fertility or miscarriage or pregnancy loss or baby loss, people just want to be encouraging, and I understand that. And I think that's the same case for when you say you don't want children and people tell you you'll change your mind. Like they're trying to be encouraging in a positive light, but I do think it's important to respect every woman's decision to become a parent or not. And so that was definitely a recurring theme in my life growing up, was that everyone would tell me that I would change my mind, and I really didn't think that I would. But like I said, God wrecked all the plans that I had for my life, and really anything was on the table at that point. And so when I met my husband in 2016, literally one of the first things that he told me on our first date was how badly he wanted kids. We are complete opposites. He grew up in the deep south. I grew up a city girl, like cliche Hallmark movie, city girl falls in love with southern boy. And growing up in the South, it was very normal for him. He thought that he would be married and have kids by 22. And so when I met him, he was 29. And so he was at a place of just really, really wanting to be a father and be a husband. And I guess at that point, I must not have been like a stark no, because it was never like a point of contention between us. It was never something where he felt like he had to convince me. I think at that point in my life, because I had just fully surrendered to whatever was next, it was always something that was on the table, and I was a little bit more open to. I think if anything, it was more like, I could be convinced, But I think there's something to say for men who really want to be fathers. I think for me at least, there was something attractive about that he really wanted to be a dad. Not all children grow up in a home where it's obvious that both parents wanted to be parents, or where both parents fully step into that role. So for me, the fact that he was so excited to step into that role and felt like he was meant to be in that role really just assured me that if we were to have children, I was going to have like a really strong partner in parenthood. And I think that's important. Obviously, who you choose to raise children with is extremely important. And so that definitely started to sway my opinion a little bit, just knowing that he would be such a great dad, and he is such a great dad now. In 2017, so a year after I met my husband, my sister had my nephew, and that was the first time that I was like up close and personal with a little baby and really got to see pregnancy and birth and postpartum and newborn life and even toddler life and motherhood up close and personal. And again, I think because in that time I was so fully surrendered, but also living my new life. I mean, I wasn't living in the city anymore. I don't want to say I wasn't pursuing a career focused life, because I always have been. I mean, I've always been very career driven, and I still had my business, but I was much more open to what life had in store for me, or what God had in his plans for me, rather than my plans for myself. And so getting to experience that up close and personal for the first time, and like, you love your niece and nephew almost as if they were your own. And so for me, it was just like experiencing a little glimpse of that love for your children and being like, I could do this. Like this doesn't seem as horrible as I always thought it would be. And so that really started again to just kind of like turn the wheels a little bit. I still was not fully there at all. But something happened when I turned 24. So in 2018, so this is again 2 years after I met my husband, 1 year after my nephew was born, it was like my maternal clock just turned on and I would have intense phases of baby fever. Like, and this might be TMI, but to where I felt like my body was literally like craving a human baby. Like, I don't know how else to explain it. I'm sure it's hormonal. I'm sure it's something to do with our bodies having a short amount of time to have children in the grand scheme of things. So that I remember like standing in the bathroom in our townhouse that we lived in at the time and just telling my husband, like, this is so weird. Like, I don't know why I have this intense baby fever all of a sudden when I had literally never ever felt that in my entire life. And so again, it was just like the wheels started to turn a little bit more. And in 2019, it was May of 2019, I had an extremely vivid dream where I saw my daughter's face. It was a dream of giving birth to my daughter, really. It was via C-section in the dream, and I just remember every little detail of her face. And I woke up that day, and I like knew her name and everything. And so I had, told one of my friends about it and was just like, that's so crazy. So, and especially the fact that it was a girl. My daughter is the second girl in my husband's family in 80 something years. So we did not think it was even possible to have a girl. We thought that if we had a baby, we knew it was going to be a boy because he has tons and tons of cousins that are all boys. His dad has brothers and he has one girl cousin. So the likelihood of it being a girl was extremely low. So to have that dream and to see my daughter's face in that dream, I will say that the daughter that I saw in that dream is not my daughter today. Like it wasn't her. And so I do have this like really deep feeling that if we ever have another child, it will be a girl because of that. But either way, in the dream, I saw her face. I knew her name. I told a friend. And later that day, I'm scrolling on Instagram and this pair of shoes came up on my Instagram feed that were named that name, the baby's name in my dream. And so that was just crazy to me. And that name is not my daughter's name currently. My husband wasn't a fan of that, the name that I had in that dream, but who knows, maybe he'll be convinced in the future. And so really after I had that dream and after I really started to have this like maternal, might be hormonal feelings of like time to become a mom, it was really all about getting our ducks in a row to be prepared to have children. Because honestly, my husband was ready like when I met him, So that same year we got engaged and we got married a year later in 2020, COVID wedding, which I'll do a podcast episode on at some point. Once we were married, I really, really started to pray over the idea of motherhood because there was so much that scared me, not just about being a mom, but I'm someone with a lot of medical anxiety. So like pregnancy sickness, all the things that can go wrong during pregnancy, birth, all of that really scared me. And I knew that if I was going to pursue motherhood, that God would really need to work on my heart and prepare me in a way that I wasn't fearful, but instead excited and just had this overwhelming peace and readiness. And so I would just pray over it over and over and over again. And I had a prayer journal where I would write all of the ways that I needed God to prepare my heart if I was going to become a mom. And so I wanted to read some of those to you today. I will specifically dive into like my fears surrounding pregnancy in the next episode, but I thought that these were some good ones to read for this motherhood episode. So I pray that you would work on my heart and take away my fears of pregnancy, birth, and becoming a mom. I pray that you'd show me more than ever that I was meant for motherhood, that my body was made for it, and that I'll be joyful in the season of motherhood. I pray that motherhood would make me more present, patient, and joyful, and that I would take time to play and dance and sing with my kids. I pray that my children will always feel seen and loved by their father and me. And this one really got me looking back in that journal because, like I said, even when I got pregnant, both times that I had been pregnant, immediately I thought it was a boy. So to look at this in my journal and think that in that moment I had a small inkling of having a daughter is just crazy to me, because I wrote, I pray for a daughter to be my bestie and be so loved by her father. And just honestly, after just months and months of praying over this, at some point, my fear and my anxieties had turned to excitement and expectancy. And that's when I knew I was ready. I didn't know if I would ever have the feeling of being 100% ready, but I knew that when my fears and my anxieties turned to excitement and just feeling joyfully expectant of how good this season could be, that it would make me more patient, that it would make me more playful, that it would heal my inner child. All those things, when the positive feelings outweighed the fear, that's when I knew that I was ready. And I think a lot of women need to hear that, because there really never is a perfect time to have a child, and there really is never a point where you'll feel 100% ready. But I think that that is hopefully something that you can take away from this episode, is that when the excitement and the joy and the expectancy outweighs the fear, that's when I knew I was ready. So I also want to say that, pre-COVID and being ready to have kids, I put so much pressure on myself and on Sean, because I felt like everything had to be perfectly prepared before we had a baby. Much like I said, there's never a perfect time to have a child, but I thought that if we got married, bought a house, and were in a good place financially, it would be the perfect time to have a child. And so I did put a lot of pressure on us to, have a house, and I don't want to say I put pressure on us to get married, because my husband was ready to propose like 6 months after dating, and I told him no way, because I was still very young. So I didn't really put pressure on him to be married, but I did feel like we needed to buy a house. We needed to be in a good financial place. Like, I had this checklist of everything that we needed in order to have a child. And it's funny because we got engaged in 2019 and our wedding was planned for 2020. And so you can take a guess as to what happened. We ended up becoming a COVID wedding couple, and I think we all learned that you really can't plan for everything, and that there will never be a perfect time. And obviously, I'm not saying to try for a baby irresponsibly, but after having to replan our wedding 4 times, which I could do a podcast episode on if you wanted, we eloped because of COVID. And even in that time, we had multiple houses fall through, whether it was permitting issues, or we were supposed to close on a house March 12th, 2020, literally the day that the world shut down. And so we couldn't get our paperwork to go through. There were just so many scenarios where our wedding wasn't what we pictured and buying a house wasn't what we pictured. But we brought Delaney home to a perfectly good rental home, and Sean even got laid off of his job. I think I was 2 months pregnant. And it all worked out. That home just brings back such fond memories. Even though we didn't own it, we lived there for 3 years, which is the longest we've lived in any house. And it was just so special that we got to bring our baby home there, and it didn't have to be ours. And we didn't have to be in the most perfect financial situation, and it all worked out. And so I just say all that because I think a lot of women like me, if you're like an Enneagram 3 or you're a very type A personality where you want to have everything planned out, there are just times in life where you can't plan. And so you just have to have faith that if it's the right timing, it'll all come together, and it did. I want to wrap up this episode by saying that if you are someone who is unsure of motherhood, like I was, it is perfectly okay to choose not to have children if that is what fits your lifestyle the best. And if you're a mom in waiting, I am sending you all the baby dust, and I am believing with you for your miracle. I wanted to say this because it's truly how I feel deep down, and I do not want this to be offensive to anyone who hasn't yet gotten to experience children, but this is just my truth and my feelings. But if I hadn't had Delaney, if I hadn't said yes to motherhood, I truly believe that having a child unlocks the deepest form of love humanly possible. It truly wrecks everything you've ever known about yourself and about loving another person. I could not imagine now being a mom, going through this life without knowing this kind of love. When we're home and it's just us and she's like cuddled on my lap and we're watching a movie and she's in my arms, it's literally, I have the whole world in my arms. Like, yes, it's important for moms to still have their own life and their own ambitions and their own goals, but at the end of the day, she's all that matters. She is the whole world, and there's nothing better. And to the girl with the list, if you're not familiar with what that is, there's a girl on TikTok. Don't go look it up because it'll just give you more anxiety and stress about having kids. There is a girl that keeps this running list of all the reasons not to have children, and I very much bought into the fear of that before I had kids. And some of those fears are very valid and are a risk when going into motherhood. And even as someone who had a very traumatic entrance into childhood, I can say that I promise you the love that you will feel for your child outweighs every single fear on that list. So next week, we're going to talk about pregnancy. If you're here listening to this series for motherhood, I just want to say thank you for being here. I am really excited to share more because motherhood is really something that wrecked my life in every way imaginable, in the worst ways and the best ways. And I just hope you'll take something away from this. So thanks for being here. Thanks so much for tuning into this episode of If I Hadn't Said Yes. If this episode inspired, encouraged, or moved you in any way, your rating and review would be greatly appreciated. Or maybe this episode made you think of someone in your life that you want to encourage to go for their big yes. Feel free to share it with a friend. You can keep up with all of our content at If I Hadn't Said Yes Pod on Instagram. We'll see you next week.